Kia ora, ngā mihi te whare, welcome to The House. I'm Louis Collins. The parliamentary week began with the first reading of the controversial Electoral Amendment Bill. Proposed changes to the way we vote always attract a lot of attention and scrutiny, and rightly so. It would probably be a worry if they didn't. Fueled by a report from the Attorney General saying that the proposed changes are in breach of the Bill of Rights Act and the Deputy Prime Minister's use of the word dropkicks, commentary around this particular electoral reform was hostile even before it arrived in the House on Tuesday. You're likely familiar with the bill by now, but to recap, it would end the ability to enrol on voting day and make the cut-off for enrolment 13 days before election day. Here's Minister in Charge Paul Goldsmith.
Broadly speaking, our electoral system and our democracy are strong, but they need constant maintenance. Confidence in the Electoral Commission has fallen in recent years, and we know the system has come under significant strain. This bill overhauls a number of outdated and unsustainable electoral laws. The package of amendments will strengthen the system, helping to deliver timelier election results, manage the costs, clarify rules, and provide more efficient services to voters. The final vote count used to take 2 weeks. Last election it took 3. The advice I received that if we leave things as they are, it could well take even longer in future elections. The 20-day time frame for a final result is likely to be challenging as it stands without these changes. Therefore, one of the most significant changes in the bill is to close enrolment before the advance voting begins. People will need to make sure that they enrol and update their enrolment details by midnight on the Sunday before advance voting opens on the Monday. That's 13 days before election day.
The bill also bans prisoners from voting, raises the anonymous political party donation threshold from $5,000 to $6,000, and deals with the offence of treating. Treating is an old Westminster term for offering food and drink to influence political gain. The Electoral Amendment Bill would ban the provision of free food, drinks or entertainment within 100 metres of a voting place while voting is occurring. But forfeiting a complimentary sausage while exercising democratic participation was not exactly the main concern of the opposition when it came to the bill. Here's Labour's Duncan Webb.
It's a dark day for democracy. Here in New Zealand, we have a proud tradition of extending the franchise for any other country in the world to women, and of constantly making our democracy accessible to everyone. That's right. And what's this government doing? What's Christopher Luxon doing? He is making it harder for people to vote. It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. We know that 110,000 people enrolled and voted on election day last year. And it's all very nice for the minister to suppose that they might enrol earlier. 137,000 people actually changed their details in the voting period. That's 137,000 people who he is making it harder to vote. He wants to stop people enrolling, stop all those people exercising their vote. That's hundreds of thousands of people who might not get a say in our democracy.
The government has cited strain on the system as the reason for the proposed change to voting. But Te Pāti Māori's Debbie Ngāwera-Paka thought there was more malice behind it.
This is an electoral suppression by design. It is racism by design. It is justice by design, and an image of a government that wants fewer Māori voting, fewer rangatahi engaged, and fewer people with any power. And let's talk about the numbers. In 2023, 48% of Māori voters aged 18 to 19 enrolled or updated their details during the voting period. Only 9.8% of non-Māori did the same. So nearly 19% of Māori roll voters used this period to enrol or update. So this bill is not race neutral. It is race targeted, like a whole lot of other bills that we've seen come through from this government. It's not a coincidence that the very communities who would be silenced are the same communities that wouldn't vote for this government, and probably the same communities that made up the netballers on the weekend.
One opposition contribution that has perhaps flown under the radar was from Labour's Shadow Attorney General Venushi Walters.
Madam Speaker, I agree with my colleague that this is a dark day in democracy, and I rise to speak against this irrational and profoundly unjust bill.
Now, electoral reform isn't uncommon. In fact, it's generally expected that following each election, MPs look to reflect on what's worked and what could be improved. By voting for MPs, citizens give the government a sort of social licence to implement these improvements, with the expectation that they will strengthen electoral integrity. New Zealand doesn't have an upper house, codified constitution, or a Supreme Court that can strike down laws, and so some argue that parliamentary supremacy doesn't protect us from an executive that may exploit that social licence. Here's Venushi Walters again.
This is an abhorrent breach of rights because here in New Zealand we lean so heavily into parliamentary supremacy that the only way people truly have, the singular way people truly have to agree to being governed or to object to being governed is to exercise their vote. And when the vote is diminished, when it's removed from certain groups of people, we must pay attention because, Madam Speaker, in many ways it is following what could be described as a handbook on authoritarian politics, where rule number one is when you get into power, you must work out how to make it very difficult to be removed from power, and this is what we're discussing today, Madam Speaker. There are times when this House, but also the people of New Zealand, need to pay very, very close attention, and it's when bills are tabled that touch the bones of our democracy, as this one does.
When a bill receives a lot of attention, whether by the public, the media, by commentators or lobbyists, it's usually because the proposed change is controversial or affects a lot of people, or both, like this bill. But some of the legislation that goes through Parliament perhaps doesn't quite touch the bones of our democracy, as Walters put it, and actually for some legislation it would be generous to say that it even grazes the skin. When a finicky and esoteric bill making technical changes in a niche industry comes up, the press and public galleries aren't exactly brimming with people. Here's Phil Smith.
Kia ora, ko fu Smith aho. Unsurprisingly, bills that everyone likes get very little attention. Bills that have scant impact receive scant love, and bills with a geographical reach that's negligible get about that much coverage. But sometimes Parliament manages the triple whammy and debates a bill that everyone agrees on, but which has negligible impact and is incredibly specific.
Madam Speaker, it is with a deep sense of gratitude that I rise today to speak on the third and final reading of the Auckland Harbour Board and Takapuna Borough Council Empowering Act Amendment Bill. Madam Speaker, this is a moment we have all been waiting for.
It's easy to presume that because Parliament is very powerful, then the things it does are all inevitably big and important. But sometimes they're very much not.
Madam Speaker, it's a simple bill, it's a common sense bill, it's a local bill. Now, first of all, this bill is a very specific bill. We all know that it's focused on one building, the historic Takapuna Boating Club building at 17 Sir Peter Blake Drive, Bayswater. And what a name for an address.
This is most likely for two types of bills under discussion, those called local bills and the even more specific private bills. Those are bills brought to the House by any MP that have a very specific impact. Local bills have a geographical impact, while private bills deal with a specific organisation, group, trust, charity, church, or even a specific person. Sometimes the debates on those bills could be mistaken for a lacklustre political spoof.
My caucus has come to refer to this bill as the Takapuna Ice Cream Bill. And the club would be a great spot to take the family on an afternoon for an ice cream or maybe a coffee.
That was from Wednesday evening at Parliament, when the House spent more than an hour on third reading speeches for a bill with an encompassing name, the Auckland Harbour Board and Takapuna Borough Council Empowering Act Amendment Bill. It was riveting stuff. The MP in charge was National's Simon Watts.
The core of this bill is its ability to loosen these restrictive conditions and allowing for commercial uses while ensuring the principal use of the land remains for community purposes.
Fixing a problem with the ongoing costs and rental income for a community asset is a commendable thing. But why, you might very well ask, does fixing such a local issue need to be debated and passed by the House? It's a fault of history. History has a lot to answer for, after all.
It is important that while we preserve the community purpose, we don't pass a law that ends up being too restrictive in the future, meaning another North Shore MP, Madam Speaker, in 100 years from now, will have to come back and lament on old laws that we're doing right now.
The thing is that local government organisations, or just local organisations, are sometimes brought into being or empowered or had constitutions enacted under specific legislation, just for them. And that includes many things like clubs or churches or amenities and charities, even patches of bush or parks. That used to happen a lot more many years ago, but it still occurs, and more often than you might imagine. Often they nailed things down so tightly that over time it inevitably caused issues. And for each of those organisations, be it the Boy Scouts or the old Takapuna Bards, if they want to do something differently, they have to get Parliament to amend the original law. The bill that was finalised on Wednesday was amending an act that was wider than many, but it included very specific rules for this one building. Many private bills, especially, just fix archaic legislation, and they do so by fiddling with the original law, rather than, say, by repealing it and starting from scratch. But in the meantime, they give the MPs a debate that is refreshingly amicable and without the layers of import and consequence. When there's very little at stake, it can almost be fun.
And I would suggest to the member, Mr Steve Abel, who spoke before, that on top of Mahjong, there might even be a venue where he might be able to play some of his famous songs that he composed when he was a famous New Zealand folk singer.
One never knows where their endorsements might come from.
And I suspect when this third reading is finished, Madam Speaker, that the Honourable Simon Watts will be going down Lake Road at the weekend to a similar ticker tape parade.
The National Party MPs were also trying to make this debate last as long as possible because they weren't in favour of some of the members' bills coming up afterwards. But governing party MPs get very little exercise at speaking in the House.
Well, the member Cameron Brewer did well to remain on his feet for 9 minutes and 48 seconds, but it came at a terrible human cost. Those of us in the House this afternoon we are the living evidence of that.
You've been listening to The House. E te whakarongo koe ki te whare. This program is produced with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mā te wā.